Back in 2011, I was a young SEO director for a small agency. I just read a blog post from a not very well-known SEO with a memorable Twitter handle, iPullRank. After reading the post, I remember sending an email to our team that said something like, "You all need to read this immediately." The author of that blog post was Michael King, and I've remained a fan of his ever since. Today, Mike is the managing director of iPullRank, the digital marketing agency he founded. Mike and his team work with some of the most iconic brands on the Fortune 500 list. He's got a really interesting backstory. I start our conversation talking about his journey from unappreciated contractor to agency owner. Mike is an expert blogger, presenter, and frequent keynoter. He's presented all over the world at basically every major conference, including MozCon, Brighton, SearchLove, and all the different SMX events. If you've never heard him present, you're missing out. His presentation style is unique. For example, this year's MozCon was a virtual event. He didn't give a speech, he made a movie. There's even a trailer. Over the course of my career, he's written blog posts that occupy the attention of SEOs for weeks afterward. I'm going to ask him about one of those posts from earlier this year, advising all of us to reconsider rank tracking. One of my favorite things about SEO is being able to toggle between your left brain and right brain. Mike King does this as well or better than anyone I know. No one this good technically should be allowed to be this good creatively. Also, Mike King is just cool. He was a professional rapper on tour in Europe, doing work on a train between gigs before he ever considered SEO his full-time career. Grab a beer and join me for a conversation with Mike King. We're going to talk about technical content optimization, natural language processing, and blindfold rapping. Michael King, welcome to Suds and Search. How you doing?
Fantastic, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. This means a lot to me. So, I've been a fan of yours for a very, very long time. I've started to sort of watch your career and wanted to see if you could take us through the journey. You were like not just a hobbyist rapper. You're like a very, very good rapper.
Thank you.
Then you went agency side and worked at some very large agencies. Now you're a business owner.
Yeah.
Walk me through sort of your professional journey here.
Yeah, the thing is, being a professional rapper is actually very similar to running a small business. In fact, if you're like a single member at LLC, you do your taxes the same way you do as if you're a rapper.
Interesting.
But anyway, yeah, so I did that for a living for 8 years. And then I got into a bike accident, not even like cool, like a motorcycle accident, like a bicycle accident. And I had to get a job to pay my medical bills, and because this is before Obamacare, like rappers didn't have insurance.
Sure.
So first place to hire me was an SEO agency because of my background in computer science. And the whole idea was that I would keep the job until I went on tour, because like this is '06, and I was going on my first European tour. And so I got the job in August and the tour was in November. So I was like, all right, cool. I'll keep this job for like 3 months and then I'll quit it and go back on the road. And then, time came and I really enjoyed the job. Like my days were just flying by, and this company that I worked at, we like did all the SEO. Like I don't know how many agencies these days do it that way, where it's like you get the site, you do the SEO, and that's that. And these would be like enterprise brands, because SEO was still kind of new at that point.
Yeah.
They're just like, okay, that's how you do it, cool. So I had no experience like writing about SEO at this time. But anyway, the whole point is that when I gave my notice, or I was going to give my notice about, I got to go on the road, this has been great, they were like, you can actually work from home. And I was like, what? So, I'm on tour with this big Dell laptop that was probably like 30 pounds. And, like it was ridiculous. But I'm on like trains in Europe, like writing code and building links and all this. And, it was a great experience, obviously, because I'm still here. But ultimately, my boss did piss me off and I quit the job. And I just kept doing that for a couple of years because I just go back on the road. Like that's how I was making my money, really. And then, I got a job at Razorfish, which is like a big multinational agency. And I really loved working there. Like it's all these smart people. And the thing was, I was just a contractor there. Like I had 24 hours a week, but I was like really intent on getting the job. So I spread my 24 hours across 5 days a week. And I was just like doing all types of things, like building tools and all this. And from their perspective, I was pretty junior because I didn't know how to write about SEO. Not that I didn't know, but like I'd never done it, you know? So they're like, oh, you don't know how to make deliverables? You must not be, you know, worth hiring, basically. So I was just a contractor. But over time, I quickly realized I knew more about SEO than anyone else there.
I would think so. Yeah.
Because it's like, I actually do it. You know, like they would
Yeah.
come to me and be like, how do you do this thing? And I'm just like, why am I a contractor?
Contractor, right.
You know what I mean? Because I was really intent on getting the job. So ultimately, they kept just extending my contract rather than hiring me. And so I had this brilliant idea to go to another publicist agency and get a job offer, bring it back to Razorfish and be like, yo, you guys got to hire me because another one of these companies wants to hire me. So I did that. And, you know, ultimately they were like, hey, we still don't have the head count for you. We loved working with you. And I was like, all right, well, I guess I'm moving to New York. And I am now SEO manager, which is a title that's like 4 or 5 levels above what I would have had at Razorfish.
Yeah.
So did that. And then, you know, working in New York was a very different experience because effectively I worked at an ad agency, like a real ad agency.
Right.
And I was the only SEO person there, whereas I was on a pretty big SEO team at Razorfish. And so it kind of fast forwarded my understanding of a lot of things with respect to like marketing, big picture marketing, not just like SEO and digital marketing and so on. But at the same time, I also started getting really involved in thought leadership. So I started blogging for Moz. And it was funny because one of my really good friends, his name is Dan, we were on tour together. And I think we were in like Sweden or somewhere on a train. Okay. He's like, Mike, I know you're doing the SEO thing. My cousin owns this SEO software company. I'm like, what? Who's your cousin? And he's like, his name's Rand Fishkin.
No way.
I was like, what? So, you know,
you were friends with Rand Fishkin's cousin all that time and didn't put the connection together until
I had no idea.
Wow.
I had no idea. I remember looking at Moz's website and, you know, seeing his mom's last name is Music, which is my friend's last name. And I was like, huh, that's weird because, you know, the way it's spelled is not common. And I didn't think to ask him like, hey, are you related to this lady? But yeah, it's his aunt, you know?
Oh my God.
So at that point, I felt comfortable reaching out to Rand. I just sent him an email and he was nice enough to respond at the time. And it's kind of funny because one of the questions I asked him in the email, I was like, hey, how do you get started with SEO blogging? And he was like, don't.
Is that what he said? Wow.
Yeah, he was like, don't do it unless like, you know, you have a really specific niche within it because it's just like so many people doing it.
Oh God, good advice.
And you know, at that point, I got more involved in the thought leadership. I went out to MozCon. My company wouldn't send me, so I took vacation, paid for it myself, and that was like a really big turning point for me, where just things started to cascade. Like from being at MozCon, I remember I was watching Will Reynolds and being inspired and being like, "Yo, I can do this!" Right. And like literally while he was on stage, I submitted for SMX East, and I got it. And then, you know, people thought I did pretty well. And then that turned into more speaking gigs. And then I was just blogging at least once a month. And so everything kind of just snowballed from there. And then at that point, I was like, hey, you know, this job that I have at Publicis, no one really cares about what I do. Like, you know, they're hitting me up like right before projects are going out the door, like, hey, press the SEO button. And I'm like, yo, I already explained to y'all that's not how this works. So, you know, at that point, I was like, let's see what else is out there. And because I had built a bit of a name for myself at that point, like everyone wanted to hire me.
I'm sure.
And so, you know, ultimately I went somewhere else and then I went somewhere else. And then I was like, you know what? I think I could do a better job of this myself. And I started iPullRank almost 6 years ago. And here we are.
Wow. How do you like being a business owner and applying for PPP and all this stuff that we have to do here?
I mean, there are things I love about it, and then there's things that I don't. You know, I think I'm one of those stereotypical people that was like a good independent contributor or individual contributor who, you know, was kind of forced into being a people manager because that's the only way to continue to grow. And that happened, you know, in the roles that I had prior to starting my own agency. And there are just a lot of things about people dynamics that wear me out. But I like that I have complete control of my destiny, so to speak.
Yeah.
Because there were situations where I worked at another like smaller agency, and people saw me as like the face of the organization, and they would make
Sure.
decisions that I didn't agree with, and they'd be like, "Mike, why are you doing that?" And I'm like, "Yo, I don't have any control here." Like
Right.
there's only so much that I can influence, and I hated feeling as though I'm the face of something that
Exactly.
I have no control over. So, and I also just like the latitude to be able to do things right.
Yeah.
Like if we go back to the beginning of my story, I pay 100% of insurance for everybody, like no
Mhm.
matter what. And I look at that as like a base level thing that you should not have to worry about if you have a job.
Good
And
for you.
I mean,
Yeah.
you can have any type of stance on that. Like it's not the way. It's not that the way that I think about it is better than anybody else, but from my perspective, that is an important thing that we need to provide. So I just like having the ability to like make those decisions and do the right thing for people.
That's awesome. It's a great journey. I've kind of been following you from afar, as I said, and one of the things you're talking about now is technical content optimization. This is
Hmm.
a service you're very proud of. I know I would encourage people to go to your SlideShare account. You have a really long presentation about it, but there are this might be an impossible question for you to answer succinctly, but there are some components of technical content optimization. What are those components? How would you define this service?
Yeah, I think technical content optimization kind of sits at the intersection of like audience research, natural language processing, and then you're just like standard SEO stuff, right?
Yeah.
And when I say standard SEO stuff, I mean like the keyword research aspect of it. And
Right.
so the NLP part of it is like, how do we understand content in the way that search engines understand content? And so
Yeah.
we know what that process looks like. We know that they break it into sentences, break it into words, apply different things to those words and phrases and so on. So how can we harness that understanding based on what is currently ranking and use that to inform how we do our content, like how we write our content? So I think of it as like kind of a multi-dimensional form of keyword research, so to speak, in that
Okay.
your keywords also have keywords, right? Like
Yeah.
I,
Okay.
I think I think that typically when you think about keyword research and inserting that into content, you're like, okay, I want to rank for the keyword water bottle, and so you repeat it 49 times, and then you think
Yes.
you're optimized. But
Right.
that's not
Right.
true. That's not true. Like
Yeah.
search engines look for co-occurring words with whatever that target keyword is. They also look for relevant topics. So if the 10 pages that rank cover these topics and you don't, you got to cover those topics.
Yeah.
So there's like a technical process of identifying this stuff, but there's still that creative process of massaging all that stuff in so that your copy meets the statistical expectations of search engines, secondarily so that it ranks, but primarily that content still speaks to an actual user. Because I don't believe in the concept of like SEO content. I think of
Yeah.
content that is for people and also will be performant in search engines.
Awesome. And so you mentioned natural NLP, and I want to ask you some questions about that.
Mhm.
There's these two vocab words that I think I'm wondering if you could help define for our audience: entities and salience. What are these
Uh-huh.
things? What do these things mean as it relates to NLP?
Sure. And yeah, absolutely. Entities, I forgot to mention that component of it as well. But entities are just people, places, and things, right? Like,
Nouns, right?
yeah, and the way that in NLP, it's like a way to understand that this is not just a collection of words; it represents things.
Yes.
And so, entity salience basically means like the the effectively the relevance to the entity. And it's like Google specifically in their NLP product will score it, and then that score is called entity salience. But in NLP broadly, it really just means like how relevant is this content to this entity.
Yeah.
And so Google came out a couple years ago and mentioned that like one of the first things that they do when they analyze a page, and when I say Google came out and said it, I think John Mueller said it.
Okay.
So I don't know if everyone at Google feels that way, but our understanding is that they look at entities first to disambiguate things on pages and better understand like what the page is about. But I don't think in our space we have, you know, the right tooling to help us capitalize on that. And, you know, when I was at the Google Webmaster Conference, I asked Paul Haar when he was speaking, I was like, you know, so understanding that you guys look at entities, what should we do about that? And of course he said, just make great content. But, you know, obviously that's
standard
not
answer. Yeah.
right. And obviously that's not going to be enough for us. So, you know, there are, of course, plenty of natural language processing libraries and tools specifically for like the data science people of the world for uncovering, you know, what's called named entity recognition. And so we can leverage that to just, again, get an understanding of what entities are covered on pages that rank, and then think about, does that make sense for us to include that in our copy for our clients?
Unbelievable. And then the next part of this process you guys have is you say test all things.
Mm-hmm.
And so what does a proper test look like going through your process?
Yeah. I mean, the thing is that there again is that creative aspect of it. You know, you could be scientific with it and say, okay, this keyword or this topic or this entity is mentioned 59 times on this other page. We got to do the same thing. But I don't think that's the approach that makes sense. You know, I think that you need to think about like, how do we weave this into the content in a way that it makes sense for the user? And so the test is like the A/B test of that content to see how well it ranks. So, you know, put it up in place of the old content for a while, see if that makes an improvement. And if not, then, you know, take it back down and try again. It's definitely an iterative process because, again, it's not about just matching numbers like people think things like that are.
Yeah. Well, there was a post you came out with earlier this year, and you've done this like a few times in my career where you write something and then it just catches fire and everybody in SEO is talking about it. And this one was about keyword rankings and how they're misunderstood. And it's funny because we get questions from clients all the time about their keyword rankings, and it's so easy to misunderstand it, and especially from a client's point of view. Like as a funny story, I can remember an email that got sent for someone from our team who was trying to explain this misunderstanding, and at some point he just said, "Also, just read this," and it was your blog post because it was a nearly perfect and complete way of describing why keyword rankings, we need to reconsider these things. So why are keyword rankings misunderstood? I think not just by clients, but by SEOs.
Yeah, I mean, one, it represents a user experience that doesn't exactly exist. Yeah. Because the way that we track rankings is like you spin up an instance of a machine that's never been on the internet before, and then the first thing that it does is it downloads Chrome and, you know, performs your one search, and then it disappears. So no user is operating that way. Like they build a context with Google, which inherently will shift how the rankings are, you know, calculated and displayed. And so right there, like the data is inherently not representative of what people actually see. And then how we count rankings also doesn't make sense because, you know, there are other organic features that we will skip and say, no, those aren't number one. We're only looking at the 10 blue links. Well, no one's experience is 10 blue links. Yeah. And, you know, basing things on that is like really still acting as if this is 2003 and we're working off of data that leaked from AOL. And like, we're just, you know, thinking about click-through rates and things like that. The reality of it is that, and there's a whole study that the Nielsen Norman Group did.
I love this study, by the way. It was great. The pinball idea?
Yeah, exactly. Like how people actually engage with a SERP. It's not up and down linearly like that. They're like looking all around because there are so many different features there. So that being the case, it doesn't make sense for us to only count the 10 blue links. And then the other component of it is that, you know, the average user does not make a distinction between the ads and the organic. So, you know, in cases where let's say it's just paid and organic results, the user thinks that the ad is number one. and Google is continuing to go in that direction to make it like
Right,
less
make it look
clear.
more and more. Yeah.
Exactly. And so for us to not take into the context of the page, it doesn't make any sense. And then the final thing is like, you can have so many elements that push the organic rankings so far below the fold. And Dr. Pete wrote a great piece of analysis on that. Being number one, you might think you're killing it, but you're not, because you're not above the fold.
Right.
So it is giving us a false sense of performance the way that rank tracking tools work. And, I think that some rank tracking tools are moving in the direction of a more sophisticated approach, advanced web ranking being one of them. And then also like tools like Stat always gave you, different components of the data so you can know what is actually there, like that you're competing with. But, this 10 blue links ranking just doesn't make sense if we're trying to understand performance and what to change in order to get more performance.
Right. And you have, towards the end of the article, you have a new framework for looking at rankings.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things you say is to keep tracking legacy rankings, just at least so you have something to compare it to over time. But you just mentioned it. You guys at iPullRank call this web ranking now. And that's the metric or advanced web ranking, is that right?
No. Advanced web ranking is a company. Like they're a tool.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But the way that you look at it is now more complex. It's how many pixels down the page you are,
right?
And how do you even come up with that formula? How do you even do it?
I don't know. I mean, I think some of that direction came from, again, the research that Dr. Pete did, where he was measuring like how far down the page was given results in pixels. And it made a lot of sense to me, because it gives you a sense where you can look at it right away and be like, okay, I'm number one, but I'm 800 pixels down. So, what does that mean in context of this specific SERP? And that way you don't have to look at every SERP to know, is this an opportunity for me or not? Even when you're doing your keyword research, if you measure this for the competitors that are ranking, you would know like, okay, this isn't a valuable keyword for me to go after, because even if I get number one, I'm not going to be seen.
Yeah.
So there's that. And then there's also like the absolute ranking that we introduced as well, where we're also counting, the local pack, the paid search and all of that. So, where does your result absolutely rank on that page, so you can get a better sense of what to do based on that.
So awesome. I guess another topic that's misunderstood that's been around in SEO as long as I've been doing it anyway, is keyword research. You talk a lot about persona-driven keyword research. I went back and looked, like, this isn't a recent thing that you've been talking about. You've been talking about this for several years now.
Yeah.
What is persona-driven keyword research, and how is it different than what people do?
Yeah. So, I mean, when I mentioned how Rand said like, hey, you should have your angle if you're gonna like write. Ultimately, organically, the whole personas and persona modeling idea became my angle early on. And that was largely because working at a big ad agency, a lot of what we did was market segmentation at the beginning of our projects. And so my manager at the time, a gentleman named Tony Effick, this was actually like the beginnings of this was a structure that he had designed, because he was like the strategy lead for the company. And he was like, what makes more sense to me is that we align keywords with personas and need states. And again, like the way that he had done it was still pretty early, and I've like iterated on it significantly. But the reason why we do that is because the standard classification of keywords doesn't really give you enough information of what to do. Like if you use navigation, transaction, or informational, there's a lot of situations where those keywords could be any of those, and it doesn't really tell you like what is the actual thing that the user is looking to do. So we match those to which pocket of the audience or pockets of the audience are most likely to be searching for this content or this thing that you're providing on the back of this keyword, and then where are they in their user journey. So is it awareness, familiarity, consideration, purchase, loyalty, or whatever? Those can inform content strategy more effectively than just, is this an informational keyword or is this a transactional keyword? Because keywords and personas are both abstractions, right?
Yeah.
like they both represent a user, whereas the keyword represents intent, and then the persona represents their attitudes, their interests, their opinions. And so when you align all those things pretty, if you consider all those things, you're able to tell more of a story that aligns with what your users expect. Whereas if you're just saying like, oh, this keyword is buy 3D television, you're just gonna be like, okay, well, here's how you buy a 3D television, like, and that's it. You're not taking into consideration like, why is this person buying a 3D television, or what are they specifically looking to learn? Like, you can then align keywords at different stages and then have the right content to move the people through their funnel or through their journey.
Awesome. Well, before I let you go, I do want to ask you about some of the COVID stuff that you've written about.
Mm-hmm.
You had 3 big takeaways on a presentation that I saw, and the word audience was in all 3 of the takeaways. The first part was to be empathetic, and you contrast that with some brands who've been tone deaf really during this. What are the brands doing? The brands that are doing this right, what are they doing?
I think it's really just like taking stock of the situation and how their brand fits into it, right? Like, I mean, the most glaring example, ironically, is Corona beer, because they were still running ads like "Find your beach," and like people hanging out on the beach, like, "Yo, we can't go to the beach right now." So I think it's really just like thinking about, how do you align your messaging with what people need and what they can do, which is effectively what we always do in marketing, but not thinking so much about your brand, thinking more about what it is that people do with your brand when they interact with it. And so, I see more brands talking about like how their product helps right now. I see more brands talking about like how they're giving back to the community. But I think at a base level, you have to do basically like a content audit and say, what content do we have that's still out there that contradicts our message for right now, and take it down or update it or something that makes it clear that this is not how you're feeling right now. And then also put out new messages that align with what people need, and show that you're a brand that's both responsive and proactive about understanding that everything is different now. And, here's how we fit into this to help you.
Awesome. In the same presentation, you said, no one's personas right now are probably right. And so it's kind of time to go back to the drawing board, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, if your brand is built on the idea that people are going to, by happenstance, when they're traveling back and forth to work, they're going to think of you and go buy your thing or whatever, that's not going to work. Nobody's going to work unless they're an essential worker, right? And they're all sitting in the house. So the behaviors of people have dramatically changed, and you've got to be prepared for the fact that some of those behaviors are not going to change back. There are people creating new habits right now. Think about Zoom. Think about how everyone uses Zoom now. Before it was like, oh, is it Blue Jeans? Is it Hangouts? Is it WebEx? Is it GoToMeeting? No, it's Zoom.
It's Zoom.
For everybody. So, and there are a lot of people that were introduced to Zoom throughout this process, and they see that it's a better product. And so there's a lot of people shifting towards Zoom. So you got to understand like where you sit in the marketplace, how these habits are changing, and then what is it that your brand can do to either reinforce those good habits or get on board with those habits. Because again, a lot of people are just not going to go back to things that no longer make sense.
Awesome. Well, I have two last questions for you. One is from Greg. What is, he said to ask you about blindfold wrapping. And I don't have more context than that. What does that mean?
Yeah, so one of the things I used to do as part of my show when I toured is I would blindfold myself and people would hand me objects and I would freestyle and guess what they were. And it was a really compelling part of my show, because a lot of times I would do shows and no one would know who I was. And, they'd be like milling around in the audience because I was like the opener or something like that. And as soon as I did that, everyone was at the front of the stage. So yeah, it was one of my things that, I kind of invented.
Awesome.
Not kinda. I invented.
That's awesome. And then when was the last time you had an old fashioned? I saw a tweet.
It's been too long. It's been probably 3 or 4 months. I mean, it's my favorite drink, you know. And I'm not gonna sit here and act like, yeah, I just got an old fashioned. It's like, no, it's because of Don Draper. And and you know, I had sought out like the best old fashioned in New York City. Ultimately, we found that it's in Queens. And you know, we would take like team outings over there just to have old fashions. So yeah, I miss it.
Yeah, hopefully we'll be back before long. How do people get in touch with you and your agency?
Sure. We're iPullRank.com, and I'm at iPullRank on Twitter. Feel free to reach out. Also, Mike and iPullRank.com if you got any questions. Pretty easy to find.
All right. Well, this was a big gift for us. I really enjoyed the conversation, and hopefully I'll see you out on the road before
Yeah,
too
absolutely.
long.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Mark. I really appreciate it.